Okay, so this is an important module on this golden rule called action leading to more insights. So let's dive right into this. So this golden rule, I've learned this concept for over 5 years right now from somebody else, and I found that this applies very truly, especially when you're first starting out in business, in your side hustle or whatever, your ventures or whatever, and also in many areas of life. You'd be surprised. Let's say, like, you plan to go, for example, on a holiday, and you think like, oh, you're gonna do this and do that, but actually when you're there and when you're experiencing everything, then you find like, oh, you have a change of plans because things, you wouldn't really know how things go until you're there to experience it yourself. Then many things change as you once you started, taking action and stuff. So imperfect action leads to more accurate insights more often than insights lead to accurate action when first starting out. What this means is when you're first starting out, imperfect action where you don't have all the information about how to do and how to start, but just taking imperfect action without knowing like the entire thing. You don't need to know how everything works when it first starts out. By the time you try to learn about everything, then start, you'd have already forgotten how things work. So taking imperfect action will lead to better insights in terms of like, oh, this is how it actually works, more often than the opposite, where you try to overplan, try to gather all the intel, all the information. Then when you take actions, like, oh, this is actually so different than I thought it was. So don't be stuck in paralysis by overanalysis or over planning. Just start, and as the famous Nike logo and slogan says, just do it. So this graphic over here, a lot of people think like, oh, at the top, you plan a lot, then only you take action. Yes, during the days in the wars and battles, the general gotta plan a lot before they take action. Otherwise, the opportunity cost is really high. They'll lose like the entire army. They'll lose the war. So like planning is very, very important at that time. But when you're first starting out, when it comes to the context of you're starting a business, side hustle, whatever, taking action first, then only you can keep progressing with your planning and how things work. Because when you take action, it would lead to more insights on how to take. It would lead to better insights and better information. Once you start taking action, you're in the weeds of things. Once you start doing things and you're like, oh, this is how it actually works. Oh, this is how I should plan better. You get a better intel and information once you start out. Okay, so speed and execution over everything. Mark Zuckerberg is famous for this saying, move fast and break things. And it might seem like a really harmless, like innocent sort of slogan, but this is a very powerful strategy that has catapulted a lot of successful companies to mega success. Because in this day and age, less so 10-20 years ago, but right now with the amount of competition, with the amount of copycats and stuff, it's all about speed, implementation, execution over planning. And don't be afraid of making mistakes. Mark Zuckerberg even said, the biggest risk is not taking any risks. In a world where everything is changing so quickly, the only strategy that's guaranteed to fail is not taking risks or not, being too afraid of making mistakes. And he even said, don't worry about making mistakes too much. Mistakes are how you learn. The real question is how you learn from them. And take it, from one of the world's youngest self-made billionaires and one of the most successful entrepreneurs of our time. So when should you overplan? Meaning not technically like overplan, but when should you just be more cautious in planning before taking action? Number one, if the cost of mistake and failure is really high. For example, like let's say you're choosing between two restaurants and both restaurants cost the same, and the next day you can go to the other restaurant. So it really doesn't matter. Just don't spend 30 minutes an hour thinking which restaurant go to. Just go anyone today, then tomorrow just go to the next one. That's an example why the cost of mistake or failure isn't very high. The monetary cost isn't really high. The second is your action or decision reversible or irreversible? Jeff Bezos calls this the one-way door versus not a two-way door, meaning when you go in one way, you can't come out. That means your action is irreversible. Let's say, getting somebody pregnant or getting pregnant yourself. You can always take an abortion and stuff, but that's mostly an irreversible sort of decision. If you're not planning to take an abortion and stuff, as an example. That is the long-term consequences as a result of this. So what are the second order effect, third consequences, the third order of effect when you make this decision? For example, like if you were to drive really fast and speed on a highway, if you were to risk your life and crash into somebody else, the long-term consequences of this is really high. Could get someone else killed, could get yourself killed as well. And if you go past the speed limit and actually do crash into something and stuff, you might not be able to drive for the next 10 years. Let's say in our example, drink driving, get a DUI, you might not be able to drive for the next, you get your license suspended and stuff. You might hit and affect somebody else that might land you to jail. So think of the long-term consequences of the action of your, if there's major catastrophic long-term consequences if you were to make a wrong decision, then that's why you should really think twice before you take any sort of action like that. So build the plane when you've jumped off. We're programmed since young that is very in conflict when starting your business, which is you gotta study very well for exams, gotta prepare very well, and we're programmed to be afraid of making mistakes. Failing means we're a failure and we're a loser. But when it comes to the real world, it's totally different. Billionaire Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, said, starting a company is like jumping off a cliff and assembling the plane on the way down. So this is an example of action leading more to, action leads to better insights rather than the opposite, because when you're first starting out, you are not able to see the entire terrain. You're not able to know what's going on and stuff. You can only plan to a certain extent with imperfect and limited amount of information. But once you start taking action, then that's when you're able to see how everything really works. So this is another great analogy. It's like you jumping off the plane, you taking action, and along the way you'll learn this is how you assemble this is how you assemble that. So this is a really great analogy. When the opposite is true, the higher level you go in business, the opposite then becomes true when insights leads to better action. For example, billionaire Warren Buffett says he only makes a handful of good decisions per year. He says you don't need to make decisions every day, just a few good ones every couple of years. But that's only applicable to him, because he has everybody, doing the execution and stuff. Then all he gotta do is just make a few small decisions, and that would lead to long-term consequences, which has a lot of costs, whether good or bad. So unless you're really high up, or as I shared previously, then that's where over planning and you need very good insights before making a decision. So you have this pin-up reminder that action leads to insights more often than insights lead to action, because people who think they need all the information in the world, they get stuck in over analysis paralysis, then you don't take any action whatsoever. When you're first starting out, imperfect actions will lead to better accurate insights instead of the opposite, where too much inaccurate insights will not result in better action taken. Prioritize speed and execution when you're first starting out over overthinking and planning, unless the cost is really high. So hope this helps, and see you on the next one.